Hello, RoahmMythril here once again, getting back to RoahmMythrill 3, and, well, you know the drill. It's time for the judge commentary on the last couple of stages we just played through. Starting with 136th place, Stolen Citadel by Lunar Rainbow Shy Guy. This stage got a 42 even, with a 2 in difficulty, 12.2 in design, 7.8 in fun, 4.6 in creativity, 7.6 in aesthetics, and 9.8 in functionality. Mick. A remix of Cossack 3 staffed with Mega Man 6 enemies. That's an interesting thematic choice. Unfortunately, while the level's design is serviceable, it's too short to really do anything with it. The main criticism I have, besides the length, is how quickly the place ramps up. In virtually no time at all, it dives into multi-enemy encounters with Panditas, Coltons, Tatebos, and who knows what else. Unfortunately, not only does that lead to a lot of projectiles on screen, the quick ramp-up deprives the experience of some variety. The Cossack platform room, by contrast, is much more low-key, but it too barely changes as you advance, being mostly just platforms with the odd Tatebo or Canapeller. It's short and to the point, which is something I can respect, but this place just doesn't do enough to really be memorable. Rounder 2 exists at the end, and he's at least a little different, but he absolutely doesn't make up for the level. Overall, this needs a lot more work. Shinryu. This is basically just a small corridor with enemies, followed by a short segment with Cossack platforms. That's it. There's virtually nothing else to the stage other than those two parts, and then the boss. As for how those two short segments play out, the first one is packed with way too many enemies for its own good, none of which really get any proper introductions and are all basically thrown at you in rapid succession. A large group of enemies, contrary to what some might say, can actually work well in moderation, provided those enemies are properly spaced and are small/squishy enough to give the player an edge over their sheer numbers, with Tellies being the main example of this. Here, most of the enemy choices are either bulky, have mid to high HP pools, or have shields. Now, if we were dealing with some of these in more carefully constructed rooms, that likely wouldn't be an issue. Dealing with all of them at the same time, though, that's way too much. The Cossack platform section following this has some more thoughtful enemy placement, but it effectively just repeats the same setup using Tatebos and Canapellers each time. It's also a rather annoying setup to go against at that, seeing as you have little room to avoid the Tatebo's arcing shot at first, and then you need to make sure you're at the proper elevation to shoot it once it raises its shield. I don't really blame anyone for over-abusing Laser Trident or Tornado Blow for this part, especially once the Coltons get thrown into the mix. As for the end boss, while I appreciate the effort in trying to make Rounder 2 more interesting, there still isn't much substance to them. Their paths taking up the entire room might be a bit awkward to deal with at first. Once you realize it's just a matter of sticking to the middle and right-hand platforms, only jumping to the other when a rounder is approaching from the opposite side, this fight pretty much has nothing else to it. Overall, there's just really not a whole lot to this stage. I can at least recognize there was effort put in here, but it ended up being way too short and repetitive. Patchy. Put that Citadel in the bag. A fairly short stage with a few screens littered with projectile enemies. Noble idea, but sadly that alone doesn't really make much of a stage. The first few screens can get pretty overwhelming with all the bullets arcing about. Enemies are also prone to respawning from getting knocked back and forth off of screens. It is much easier to take the upper path to get rid of the pandas. It's a neat consistency touch of using only Mega Man 6 enemies due to the little story involving Mr. X. The aesthetics fittingly resemble Cossack Citadel, but they could use a bit less empty blue sky of nothingness though. We aren't bound by hardware limitations anymore, after all. The second half of the stage is nothing but Cossack platform hopping, while dealing with some cannons every now and then. It can get pretty boring and or tedious if you ever get thrown into the pit and have to redo the entire jumping section again. The boss is a little wonky with its unclear hitbox and the sudden unpredictable direction changes, but otherwise a fine fight overall. Flashman 85. Smashing together enemies from one game and a level from another game is a stroke of genius. I'm super bummed that the design here doesn't do the premise justice. The level looks promising enough at first. A text box that gives the level some flavor, a perfectly appropriate introductory challenge, and oh geez, enemies everywhere, what even is going on, help, there's too many of them, why won't the section end, gonna skip everything with Rush Jet, oh look, a checkpoint. The second half of the level is better, though the pacing is somewhat slow and the challenges are fairly repetitive. I recognize that an effort was made to craft a challenge progression and to combine elements meaningfully. Experimenting more with enemy positioning and level flow would have helped this section to really stand out. Of all the bosses who could have usurped the Cockroach Twins' room, Rounder 2 was definitely the best choice. I'm not so sure about the Sheepman blocks. A Cossack platform, which the player has already seen, would have sufficed, or even entering through the ceiling to avoid the platform problem altogether. Disappointingly, due to the lack of invincibility frames, special weapons end the battle almost instantly. It's thoughtful that the spikes explode when the boss does, but it's either an oversight or a misguided soft block countermeasure to allow any spikes to remain. Soft block countermeasure. Oh, because depending on where you defeat the second round or two, there's a very, very small chance that the energy element could drop onto one of the existing platforms up there, and you could fall down to where the spikes were, and if somehow you have no utility energy, you can't get back up because you can't make that jump. Maybe that's the thought process as to why there's still those two spikes at the end. Just a way out to repeat it. An odd choice, but at least that kind of makes sense. Overall, the level needs more. More restraint in the first half. More, read any, power-ups. More background graphics than a lone onion dome. More places for the player to rest. Additional screen transitions would add natural pauses and break up the long scrolling sections. More focused theming. Enemies from Mega Man 6 are a good start, but the assortment feels haphazard, and there should be some auto-scrolling to fully capture Mega Man 4. Yeah, it did feel kind of weird going through what was an auto-scrolling segment in the original Mega Man 4, but here it's all just stationary. That did feel weirdly odd. Ace Spark. The first half of this stage is probably its lowest point. It's crowded, messy, and whilst the top path is significantly less irritating than the lower, either way you're probably taking damage. The Hotchkissin flying above the stage, acting as a pseudo-Lakitu from Super Mario, is a particular nuisance. Enemy and gimmick placement gets much more thoughtful towards the second half of the stage, that is, to a player that doesn't go in half-cocked. Honestly, I really can appreciate the timing challenges here if you go Buster only. It's not too difficult, and there is a steady difficulty curve. Dare I say, I found this segment fun in its own way. The foreground is reasonably tiled. In fact, after comparing the two, it pretty much nails the Cossack 3 tile layout style, which is a neat touch. Unfortunately, the background being almost solid blue leaves much to be desired. I'm aware the Cossack 3 dev kit tiles are missing the clouds, but there are plenty of other tile sets with clouds in the dev kit. I'd say this would have been a good place for some more improvisation, but oh well. The fight against Rounder 2 is easy enough, and I always appreciate actually trying to give a dev kit boss a new challenge, but the layout makes it rather punishing. The boss ends up resolving around... I think you mean revolving. The boss ends up revolving around sitting in one reasonably safe spot, but where also getting hit does not knock you into the spikes, and jumping around her occasionally. Not really engaging, but once again the effort is there. I think the entire room should have been erased upon defeat of the boss, rather than just the spikes, as it's rather unfortunate that poor luck can stick the energy element in an unobtainable place currently. Yeah, that would be an issue. So yeah, overall this was a fairly simple stage, though the problems, they are definitely there. The first room, I did kind of feel like it was overcrowded, though in some ways an overcrowded room can feel a little bit fun, but this did at some points this did feel a little overboard, and yeah, I think the biggest problem was that most of the enemies used were on the tanky side, because yeah, things like the pandas and Colton, they take a few shots to get rid of, and of course you have those shielded cannons that... Shielded cannon abuse is kind of a thing. It has been a thing in previous Mag Memos. The Cossack platform part, that did just feel kind of long and repetitive, so yeah, I kind of get what they were talking about there. And that setup, yeah, going Buster only, it is a bit of a challenge, but again, a repetitive one, and having to be positioned just right to be able to hit the cannon while the shield is up, and not having much room to dodge the arcing shot. Yeah, if you're not like me to where you just stubbornly tend to use the Buster, Laser Trident's the way to go. It would have made this a lot easier. As for the boss, yeah, that's just a dev kit thing for me. I always have trouble figuring out how does the hitbox on that thing work. So many of my shots were just deflected, and I'm not sure why. So yeah, that one's a weird one. But overall, if you get the hits in, Rounder 2 really isn't that hard. Still, an okay enough stage. I honestly didn't even realize as I was playing it that it is essentially just 3 rooms, 2 long rooms in the boss chamber. So with that, next up we had 135th place, Military Training Grounds by DB Sonic. A 42.2 with a 2.6 in difficulty, 13 in design, 9.6 in fun, 4 in creativity, 7.2 in aesthetics, and 8.4 in functionality. Mick. If these are supposed to be training grounds for military robots, why are there so many Dr. Wily symbols? I don't think the level is being honest with me. Silly commentary aside, the first thing to really say about this level is that it's very focused on combat, with the occasional bout of platforming to avoid spikes. That's not a bad thing by itself. There have been pure combat levels in Mega Man before, and they've managed to work reasonably well. Plus, I do have to give some credit to the enemy variety. You don't see GSQs and Parasutes together that often. GSQs. I forget what that actually is. And the fact that RoahmMythril DX wasn't a pain in the rear in this go-round is something I commend. Unfortunately, there's a reason why Mega Man rarely has levels without a few more gimmicks in the toy box. Mega Man levels by and large carve their identities through distinct aesthetics and unique gameplay. That is not present here. It's just enemies and spikes, nothing else. This level doesn't have enough going on to be memorable. Most of it just runs together into a mesh of nothing. It's not unfair or even truly all that difficult. The worst thing I can say is that the number of checkpoints compared to spikes is too harsh for my liking. Otherwise, the main issue about it is that it's really hard to remember much of anything about it. Definitely not the worst thing I've ever played, but it needs work for sure. Yeah, the checkpoint issue, that definitely hit me bad with the first token room, and the fact that it's a spike gauntlet, and if you fail it, you're going back quite a ways to the beginning of the stage. That could have used better checkpoint placement. Shinryu. For a place that's meant to be a military-grade obstacle course, this ended up being very easy and quite boring. There's not too much to talk about here, other than the sheer lack of gimmicks and the mostly basic level structure. While the enemies are introduced and laid out well, and some of the platforming around them is decent, it's not enough to really make the level feel as engaging as a whole. It really could have used some gimmicks to make things more interesting. As it is now, there's very little in this stage that actually sticks out. The only really noticeable segment I can think of in this level is the first token room, and that's mainly due to it being the one part that's actually somewhat difficult, thanks to the tight jumps and spikes everywhere. Other than that, there's not much else to discuss, other than maybe the odd banning of certain weapons here. I don't really understand the decision behind disabling Spark Chaser, Tornado Blow, and Magnet Beam for this level. I didn't even notice going through the menu that there were some banned weapons. I noticed Magnet Beam. Maybe the tokens that require you to use Rush Jet would have been easier with them. Even then, I don't think that would have hurt the level as a whole, and you'd still be using a roughly similar method for obtaining the tokens either way. That's just my take on it, though. Yeah, Tornado Blow does give you some movement options, but I wonder why Spark Chaser was disabled. Patchy. Move your legs, soldier! It's a fine short little level. Not too difficult, and it plays nicely for the most part, though it feels like the level gets progressively easier the further you go somewhat. Yeah, honestly, I kind of agree with that. The amount of tricky jumps and death pits towards the end is fewer than the beginning portions. It also seems like it's much less populated. It's most noticeable with the token side paths. The first token has you navigate through a bunch of spiky maneuvers, while with the last token you only need to use Rush Jet through 2 spikes that are fairly out of the way. Props for proper enemy introductions. I like the screen where, when you enter, there are 2 parachuting enemies swooping down while you have to lure away the lob shot from the cannon. Not sure what's the deal with the empty corridors before the boss. Doesn't seem like they're there for build-up of tension. Also, the aesthetics don't exactly match with what the title's implying. It's merely mixing the Wily stage tile set with a few Stone Man tiles here and there. A training ground for Wily's robots, I guess? Flash in the Dark doesn't exactly scream military either. Maybe could have borrowed some assets from Commando Man. The Metal Daddy fight at the end is a somewhat unique choice for a boss, but the changes to the arena don't really change the dynamics from the original fight in Mega Man 4. The ceiling spikes are irrelevant, and the pits at the side are too narrow to make an impact. Flashman 85. One of the keys to a good level is having at least one element that's truly memorable. By the time I'd played every entry for this contest and started replaying them all, I had no recollection whatsoever of this level. That's not to say the level is bad, rather, it lacks a necessary punch. The aesthetics look fine enough, but don't really tell a clear story. Music and tiles from Mega Man 9 Wily 1, plus comparatively over-detailed Stone Man tiles vaguely resembling the rocks from Mega Man 9 Wily 1, equals a level that feels like Mega Man 9 Wily 1. Initially, I got no sense of military or training, only a modest metal theme with wily logos out the wazoo. In retrospect, I can see paratroopers, tanks, and soldier helmets, but why ignore the militaristic dev kit assets from Mega Man 5 and Mega Man 10? I'm also unsure what the architectural goals of the level are, especially with all the boss gates and empty screens. In terms of challenges, everything is fair and introduced well, yet the difficulty and complexity never increase beyond the initial learning curve. Enemy use is safe and unremarkable. Distant checkpoints and unevenly distributed health/weapon refills account for a lot of the difficulty. Things start getting interesting when spikes are involved. The first token is genuinely good, and the simple addition of 2 floor spikes to the boss fight is an invigorating twist. Metals in the first mini-boss fight can enjoy a fall through the destructible floor to their doom, and players can join them later when mistaking a bottomless pit for a screen transition. Oh dear. I don't know that it was entirely necessary to disable any weapons, but it's fun to figure out how to enter the E-Tank room, which totally should have had a token. Hopefully no one will get stuck in there with low weapon energy or notice how the screen continues scrolling beyond the wall. I don't recall noticing the scrolling issue at any rate. Ace Spark. This level doesn't do anything particularly egregiously wrong or right. It's a run-of-the-mill, rather mediocre, unpolished, and fairly generic stage. What I could otherwise say here, I've said elsewhere, but that is to be expected, because this rather looks like a first attempt at Mega Man stage creation. Let us get something straight. I'm not here to mock, or be mean, or cruel. I'm just a mutt who has been somewhat obsessed with this franchise for many years. But here, I am going to identify and address a recurring issue throughout this contest. People using Wily stages as reference. This is, in my opinion, a mistake. Probably because they're a generic laboratory, anything fits in them, and so a stage resembling the NES Wily levels is easy. The truth is, these stages are often made at the end of development, and most of the effort went to making spectacle bosses. The stages? Oftentimes the developers are starting to run out of money, time, or cartridge space, or with Mega Man 2, all 3. There are exceptions, but interviews have mentioned this to be pretty much the case across the series. Whilst referencing Robot Master stages is a much better idea, avoid the earliest games. Still good games, but showing their age now. Mega Man 2 was developed in the dev's spare time, as Capcom the Fools had no faith in it. It's good for such an early NES game, but it shows the growing pains and developers fighting against the NES's limitations rather than mastering them. Hinafune described Mega Man 3's development as particularly turbulent, and the game was basically released rushed and unfinished. They even lost all of Top Man's stage to a computer crash and had to quickly make a new one. Is that why Top Man's stage became a weird greenhouse, or was that always the case? Later games refined the formula, and part of the reason this franchise has kept going is continuing to try out new things and levels. For the record, if this is a first effort, the fact it's basically just an unpolished Wily stage shows promise. My personal recommendation is to explore the franchise, and by extension the dev kit. There's a reason we remember the Robot Masters and their stages. Honestly, this is kind of a problem I tend to have, and it is one reason why I kind of got to a point of just feeling uninterested in continuing the perfect runs. The fact that I started doing Fortress stages. Initially, I never planned to do the Fortress stages because, in all honesty, I just don't tend to find them fun. I far prefer the Robot Master stages. They're way more unique, the gimmicks are more interesting. I find fighting the Robot Masters more fun and interesting than fighting the Wily stage bosses. Basically, the majority of the interest for me in a Mega Man game is the opening set of stages, not the end game. That's a personal preference thing, but it's just always how I've kind of felt. The Wily stages just don't tend to be as memorable to me overall. So, yeah. I can kind of get what Ace Spark is talking about there. The stage itself, though, overall, I think is fairly competent, and was a decent enough stage to play through. I do think checkpoint placement, though, was my biggest issue, because getting killed twice in that spike gauntlet, going for the spade token, and having to go all the way back to the beginning, that did get a little bit draining. But other than that, pretty decent stage overall. Not bad at all. So with that, that's where we're going to call it for now. Thank you very much for watching, I hope you're enjoying the series so far, and I shall see you again next time. Until then, fare thee well. Why do I even still have my original sidebar graphics on the setup for recording this? Okay, quick eye test. Better 1, better 2. Better 1, better 2. Yes, thank you again, Neo, for making a better version of this for me.